Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are back with another Neurodiversity Stories. I'm your host. My name is Darren Clark. And guys, I want to say a massive, massive thank you to everyone that takes part in this, who were all our previous guests. Also, all the people that do tune in from all different parts of the world. So guys, if you can let us know where you are tuning in from. As mentioned in the previous Neurodiversity Stories, I mentioned that we have people from Argentina, from Poland, from Kenya, from Australia. So if you are watching live, then please do feel free to drop in who you are and where you're from, and feel free also to connect with other people as well within the feed as well. And if you are watching this on replay, again, do feel free to drop any questions on this as well. So guys, we are back with another Neurodiversity Story. So we do these every single Friday at 11 a.m. UK time. And the object of this is to spread more awareness around dyslexia, neurodiversity, all the kind of the different things around neurodiversity and starting those conversations. So I'm dyslexic myself and I have ADHD. I found out at the age of 36, around 36, 37, 44 now. So I'm still kind of understanding my own kind of dyslexia, my own ADHD. So, and one of the things that I've been able to kind of work with people on this is understanding what their takes are and listening to people's stories. So guys, that's why we put this together. So this is purely to build a global community of people and understand more around neurodiversity. So guys, I also want to say a massive thank you to our brand new sponsors who are helping to support this channel. So we have a touch, type, read and spell. And guys, I just want to show you this.
I always knew I had problems with reading and spelling. That was before I heard about touch, type, read and spell. It's amazing. I make fewer mistakes when I type emails. And if I get stuck writing by hand, I just think where my fingers would go. Thanks to TTRS, I am faster on the computer. Reading feels easier, and every day my confidence grows. I guess it goes to show you, it doesn't matter how old you are. It's never too late to start learning. Make a change today with Touch, Type, Read and Spell.
So guys, a massive thank you to Touch, Type, Read and Spell, sponsoring our Neurodiversity Stories. So they are an award-winning multi-sensory course that teaches typing, reading and spelling. All their details will be in the blurb underneath. But guys, we have another absolute fantastic guest. We have Cassandra Rollett. I do apologize. I've been through this in the sense of pronouncing her name, her surname. So it's Cassandra Rollett-May. She is an absolute phenomenal advocate for dyslexia, and she's been doing some incredible work within this field as well. So she's going to be telling her story around her own dyslexia, and also the amazing work that she's doing as well. So I'd like to introduce you to Cassandra, and here she is. Good morning, Cass. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you very much. It's technology. I live in the middle of nowhere, so our technology is often dependent on the broadband. So I know, as well as glitches, it can be difficult. But thank you. It's lovely to be here, Darren. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's really good to be able to share my story.
Absolutely, it's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, this is the beauty of live TV. That we can kind of just put stuff out and things happen. So we're all good. So Cass, I've been following the work that you've been doing on social media. It's been incredible.
Yes,
I know you have an incredible story, and you're doing incredible things in this sector as well. It'd be amazing if you could just introduce yourself and just tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Okay. So, well, my backstory, I love that we call it stories, because I think that's the thing. I currently work with other people who have neurodiversities and difficulties with learning. So I constantly talk about their story, because our lives are our story and we can move through it. So my story is different to yours. We're a similar age, but I was diagnosed when I was really little. So I was picked up in primary school when I was about 7 years old, formal diagnosis when I was 8. So I'm now in my 40s, and actually that was quite unheard of to have a diagnosis back then. So I'm very grateful for the school I was in, because I did instantly get specific help to work through my dyslexic needs. I was in small classes too, and that meant that I could work through those areas of need. So I was aware that I had a learning difference, that I was different, and it enabled me to know that throughout my whole sort of educational process. So that's different to your experience. So it's a blessing and not always a blessing, because obviously other students didn't understand that I could articulate and be one way about my work, but then my homework would take me 3 hours, or I had to go back and see the teachers. So I was viewed as being a bit nerdy and so then you have the issues of sort of not quite always getting on with your peers. But on the other side of that, I often had that understanding that there was a learning need. So that kind of spurred me on to want to support students like myself. So I managed to go through the education process. It wasn't always easy, but I got to university and trained to be a teacher, and did that as my first process, so that I got to understand what it was like to be in the classroom being a teacher. And different schools that I've been in allowed me to talk about my dyslexia. Sometimes I wasn't allowed to say that I was dyslexic because the school viewed it as more negative, but that I could say that I understood. So I kind of understand that, because I know on one of your LinkedIn posts the other day you had about, do you disclose if you're dyslexic or not? And I always have, because it's who I am. And you can't hide it in a job where you have to spell and proof check other people's work and know things. So I know I'm going to make mistakes, and it's a hard thing, because I think when we're dyslexic too, we often want to be our best selves, and we know that parts of our brain that don't enable us to do that so quickly as other people may, or in our perception of things. So absolutely. I have always disclosed it, but it's how I've had to disclose it. And then sort of following my journey on, I then became a SENDCo in a school, because obviously my area of specialism was my own dyslexia. So I moved from teaching into being a SENDCo to doing other similar roles. But I found that the education system is still very rigid, and the understanding is there, but when, not to get political first thing on a Friday morning, but the governments change and their viewpoint on things changes. So when I was a SENDCo to begin with, there was so much pushing for understanding all of the neurodiverse needs. And then all of a sudden we changed government, and that kind of all disappeared. The funding disappeared. And so how we had to respond to students was different. And I found it really constricting. So I decided to sort of be brave and step out on my own and see what difference I could make, sort of more one-to-one. So I'm still working towards my goal. I think we learn all the time. But where I am now is that I have my own little business, and I consult with schools and work with staff and parents, but then also do the tuition one-to-one, so that I can help students who find it challenging. So that's kind of my whole story. No, quickly as I can tell it.
No. That's Cass, that's fantastic, because what I like is the fact that you've given me kind of your journey, and then the things that you're doing, and then what we can do now is kind of pick it apart in the nicest possible way. Just kind of and delve in a little bit into kind of the story. So so you were so what age were you diagnosed? You said you were diagnosed with dyslexia. What age?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 8. So I was fortunate to go to a private primary school. And so the class sizes were smaller, and it was kind of obvious that I wasn't making the same progress as other people. So the expectations were high, but I was sort of verbally able to work with my peers, but there was something not quite right. Luckily for me, the principal of the school had been training to understand dyslexia. So that's where I feel like it was, I always feel things happen for a reason. And that was one of the first ones. So yeah, I got instantly picked up as not following a normal path of learning like my peers.
And then, so 8 years old, that's, in some aspects, people, that's as young in the aspect of what kind of 36, 37 was,
Yes.
So can you remember what it was like going to kind of secondary school? So, high school, if you listen to this in
primary was good. Primary was small. I still got asked, can you catch dyslexia? Does it mean that you're stupid? My parents got a lot of flack because at that time, dyslexia was coming sort of to be aware, and lots of the other parents just said, oh, actually, it's just a nice word that your child is stupid. So that's not a word that I use, but that's basically what my parents were told by their peers, that, that I wasn't going to achieve very much, and it's just a label, and it means that your child's just not very smart, which luckily they didn't believe, and the school didn't believe. So so moving on, primary school was good. I had lots of strategies to help me learn, and I did move forward. I moved to a state secondary school that was, to me, 1 billion times bigger than the primary school that I was in.
I can imagine.
And yeah, absolutely. And so you have all the other aspects of dyslexia, like not necessarily remembering orientation of where things are, so getting lost, having to sort of deal with being more independent. So although I was quite conscientious and wanted to be respectful and responsible, trying to remember homework or PE kits or where rooms were, it obviously got easier the more you learn strategies to cope with it, but that was definitely a thing. And then obviously being in a class size that was more than doubled what I was used to, and we were instantly put into sets. So that was quite demanding, because I wanted to achieve, but couldn't always on paper achieve what I could do verbally. Yes. So again, I had it from sort of two different angles, really. I had the teachers telling my parents that I was good, but not good enough. And then I had the students saying, well, you're in this set and you work really hard, but why aren't you smart enough? So you kind of have the social side of it as well.
Was that because I think I mentioned this on previous Neurodiversity Stories, and in the sense of when I first started secondary school, from the off there was that put into certain classrooms and put into different sets. And I guess if you've come from a school, I mean, were there many children that you went to within primary school that came to you within secondary school, or were you kind of on your own?
No, I went by myself, if I remember rightly.
So that in its sense is daunting enough to go into secondary school, go into a big school, yes. And then I guess then being put into different sets on, I guess it's on what abilities, is that what
yes.
what they kind of did?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's still the same today. It's generally on the ability that you are on paper. So that's kind of the education system at the moment works on children taking SATs, although it's a bit different since COVID, but they take SATs and it gives them a level and they compare that with what the teacher says. So there is an ability to have some sort of overlap and teachers to put a case forward for a child looking slightly different on paper to how they react in person, but it's still kind of the same today. And some schools do you can slide between the sets as a teacher sees you progress, or if you find it more challenging. Some schools kind of stick at it and you just have to kind of reach that high. So it's one of the things that my students still struggle with today. So that again, that brings that my ability to understand what it's like. And I think for me, the fortunate part of it was that I got put in not the top sets, but the ones just below. And that meant that I could focus on my education, but it was really challenging. And I still had teachers saying, when my parents said, she spent 3 hours doing this homework that should have been done sooner. And they're like, oh, well, she's not dyslexic because she answers questions in class or these kind of things. So it was still back then misconceptions about what dyslexia was.
I think you're absolutely right, Cass, in that aspect. And again, when you get kind of diagnosed, and it's if a parent has their child diagnosed, then sometimes it is fearful in some aspects, and it's not it's fearful in the sense of, because everyone as a parent, wants the best for their child, and they don't want to see that their child
Absolutely.
is, going to be, deemed in any way. It's going to be unfair for them to be able to get their education. So I can get it from that side, but there is still a lot of education around it. So to not be, incredibly fearful, but again, I guess educating yourself a little bit around what strategies can help, what can help that child, and the child's not doomed as soon as they get that diagnosis. It's just I see it's that journey.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think our emotional responses and our perceptions of things can be very different, and what we're told. So I do think it's belief versus reality sometimes, because on every level, so the child, the parent or carers, and then wherever they are at in their educational or work journey, it is deciding, like we just said, about, do you disclose that you're dyslexic? Do you have to? Is it a good idea? What do people think about it? Because there's still misconceptions. So we're luckier now in the world that we live in that there is diversity in everything, not just in the way that we learn and we think, but there are also people that find it harder to understand that. And I think we often have called dyslexia a hidden disability, because it's not really obvious, because generally when you speak to someone, they can still articulate what they want. They might be a super mathematician, but still can't spell words that would have been their early primary school lists of spelling. And there's that sort of, we call it like a spiky profile. There's all these things that are going on that make it difficult to understand. But because you look like everybody else and you don't have special glasses, or you haven't got a hearing aid, because all these different things, that if you had a disability that was visible, it's visible, and hopefully people now aren't judgmental, but they can adapt their way of thinking and being. When you can't see something, it's harder.
Absolutely. And I guess as well, it's very, if you try to describe, say, dyslexia to someone, they have this perceived, a kind of perceived thought that, okay, it's reading and writing that they struggle with. But as we know, with dyslexia, it's so much more. It's behavioural, and
absolutely
the anxiety that can come in, the mental health element to it, the organization. There's so much. And then when on top of that, you then say, well, actually, it also as well, it's on a scale. So one person's dyslexia could just be slight, so to speak, using that terminology, or it could be severe. So I can imagine someone that's not neurodiverse, or someone who's not, doesn't really kind of equate into that conversation a lot, thinking, this is how do I even get my head around this?
Absolutely. I think it's you're totally right. We have all of, if you're in the industry, or you've had, or like in academics, sort of looking at psychology and that kind of stuff, or you've had a diagnosis and been through the process as a parent, you kind of start to understand. But the thing I always find is that parents who've had diagnosis, like reading the reports, are really complicated because the language is so different. And then the parent and the carer are supposed to understand it to be able to explain it to a child, and then they're supposed to explain it to someone else what they need. So it's still complicated process, but it's getting a little better. But I think it's totally the thing that you say, and I think it's hard because we have kind of boxed everything before, which is why, like we've spoken about before, the neurodiverse term is brilliant, because everybody is neurodiverse and everybody is on this windscreen of, what affects them in certain ways, because we can all be slightly sound sensitive, we can all be a little bit OCD about things, we can all the labels that we know, everybody has a little bit of part of those, but it's to the extent that it affects them in their sort of normal living, I think that has the way forward. And I always view it like the other, for my business, as you can see behind me, I have a lighthouse, but the other part is I always use a tree, because I explain, like, if you've been given a diagnosis, you'll often have like the trunk of the tree as your label, but coming from it, you have the branches. And so you may be more dyslexic, but you might have a bit of dyspraxia, or you might have more ADHD, but your dyslexia comes out just when you're trying to write your thoughts down, because that's connected to the ADHD thought processes. So I try to sort of inform my students and the parents and families that I work with that you can't, as you said, you can't just have one straightforward diagnosis, because everybody is equally different. It's just trying to look at it from a certain way.
Absolutely, and that's really, Cass, I'm absolutely, I love the fact that you brought up the diagnosis, because even, I've been in kind of the dyslexia kind of field, I guess, or, neurodiverse, probably really kind of into it like the past kind of 2-3 years. And I've looked at I remember my diagnosis, and even to this day, when I look at some of it, it really, I find it very confusing. And
Yes.
you know, I've spoken to some incredible people, you know, like yourself and professors and all these kind of people that kind of, you know, try and break it down for me. And I really struggle. I don't know if it's a neurodiverse element of it, but you're absolutely right. Bringing those elements of the visual, I guess, would really help. The branches, I can see that. But have you seen that in the past? That it really is pretty tricky.
Yeah, definitely. It's a thing I see. Sort of, social media is amazing on many different levels, but it's the thing I still see from the parents that I support, the families that I support, and when you see things sort of on different social media platforms, when parents are saying, "Yeah, I've had the diagnosis. This is going to be so helpful." But what does the report mean, or what am I going to ask school for? And there's kind of still a gap in how we diagnose and who diagnose. No disrespect to my very clever educational psychologist colleagues, but they write from an academic perspective. So the reports aren't really written for the families or the child. They're really written for someone else in academia. But even those people don't necessarily understand it. So it's trying to find the gap in between. And I think that's why, like what we're doing now, the neurodiverse stories, that's the key thing. It's getting individuals to understand their own stories, to see their strengths and the things where they need support with, and not worry so much about the technical terms, because actually in life, all of us just need to know, right, what am I good at? Where do I need the help? And I think that kind of sort of helps with what we're doing.
And I guess there are so many unanswered questions. And I've always felt that once I found out about dyslexia and ADHD, then it was a case of, right, okay, so it was almost chipping away. All these questions I had, questions I didn't even know to ask. And then I started thinking, well, is this dyslexia? Is this part of my neurodiversity, or is it something else? And sometimes it can get sort of muddy watered, because I think, well, actually, is that just me being human in the sense of, you know, my human abilities, or something, or is it part of the neurodiverse? So I always find myself trying to answer questions.
Yes. And I would say that is definitely part of your neurodiverse brain. I think it's part of who we are. I think that's, you know, we were just saying, like, obviously you can pigeonhole different things. So if you're dyscalculic, that technically means that you have more of an issue with maths. If you have dysgraphia, you're finding it hard to communicate via a written form. If you're dyslexic, it's defined as reading and writing difficulty. But as you said, it's way more than that. But the flip side that we don't necessarily talk about is the human side. I think that the majority of students that I work with, so I've been in the field of education and working with students for like half my lifetime now. And the thing that I always pick up on, the word you hear is confidence or self-esteem issues. And I totally understand that, because I sit here now having, like yourself, kind of tried to understand my needs and try to develop a positive outlook. But I think we always want to understand why we can't do something, to understand what's going on with our brain. And then we're not wanting to be the best at something, but we are wanting to achieve what the expectation is. And so then that becomes the bench that we mark ourselves by, which is no one can be perfect. And then that affects our self-belief and our self-esteem. And so even though dyslexia might be a reading and writing difficulty, it really isn't. It's way more. And that's what you're doing through your stories. We're enabling other people to understand that it's not just one specific thing.
Yeah, and I guess it's, you know, Cass, when we talk about things, we also talk about tools to do our jobs, and we also talk about coping mechanisms. There we go. So I completely lost train of thought, but which was funny at that point. But coping mechanisms, and you know, I was on an amazing Facebook Live with she's on here, Philippa Fabry, and I was talking about my ADHD. And I was saying I find it very difficult with dyslexia and ADHD to kind of wind my brain down, because it's always charged. I mean, most people's brains are charged because we live very busy lives. And I used the analogy. I said, well, I love photography, so I love taking pictures of wildlife, and I love that. But I have to physically have a camera to do it, because if I pick up my mobile phone, I think of that as work. So I pick that up and I think, well, actually, I'll scroll through social media or check an email on this. But with an actual camera, once I'm looking through that lens, it's almost like time stopped in that sense. And that really does help. And I'm very keen. So I'll visualize like I like taking pictures of wildlife. So it'll be if it's a rabbit or a duck or a deer or anything, but it's almost what that animal is going to be doing next. So I like to catch them in movement. So when they go this, but that has really kind of, as a coping mechanism for me to try and calm things and live in the moment, that those kind of things have helped. Is there anything that coping mechanisms has helped you, or that you know of any of your students or people that you work with?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And I think what you said is true. It's that other side of it, that we don't always know when to switch our brains off, because we're always running or trying to catch up with things. So yeah, I think for me personally, I'm very rural, so I like to go for walks, and I think that definitely, I found now the summer months are here. I've also got a little boy, a toddler, and so before his bedtime, when I finish my evening lessons, we now go for a short walk, because I find that I'm coming away from the technology. Exactly what you said. I've managed to make my business go online during the pandemic, so that means I'm technically on a device nearly all day long when I'm not looking after my son. And I was just, at the end of the day, your brain is just like, but then you said, you go on, you go, oh, I've got another message, or I've had this, I must respond to it. We live in that 24 hours. So definitely for me, it's getting outside, being separate in kind of nature. But again, I've got a toddler, so it only takes 5 minutes working with him. But I sometimes need a break from him, because that other part of our neurodiversity, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I sometimes get sensory overload. So if I've been in the office working and I've had lots of bits going on, or I've had to adapt my timetable, that's quite stressful for me as a dyslexic person. I try not to allow it to sort of affect the way I do my business, but for me personally, it probably means that I'm slightly more stressed inside. And then if I go in to talk to my family and my little boy is on like a perpetual sound or asking me loads of questions, I actually have to leave again, and I feel really awful for doing that. But again, me personally, I can't deal with the too many sounds going on at the same time.
I'm so with you on this in that sense, and it's really interesting actually. I'm just going to share a couple of people's comments. And then we'll go. So Kieran Windsor, who was an incredible guest on Neurodiversity Stories a while back as well, a great friend of mine. But I think there's often an expectation on the diagnosed person to do something about it once they've received the diagnosis. I get, I would agree with you in there is this kind of expectation, I guess, to then have it, and then so what are you going to do with it? And equally that brings pressure in itself.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why, again, you have to, I think what his comment is absolutely true, because it shouldn't be down to the individual, especially if they're younger, because you still need someone to advocate for them. But if that advocate also doesn't understand the process, it's a bit difficult. But that's why kind of owning your own story is really important. It's kind of like the thing that's come out of well-being and sort of mental health is kind of the journaling idea. And so I often, when I was working more face-to-face with students, we'd often work on developing their own journal in order to just speak out, or in drawings, or for me to write, their parents to write, what it was like for them, what they were having difficulties with. Because again, if you struggle with your confidence, then how are you going to tell somebody else that you find these things difficult? And should you have to? Because if it's actually you're in an academic setting, it's the adults, it's their job to work out how they're supposed to help you. But actually, if you take ownership of it, it actually will help you more through life, I think.
That the journaling, that's I love that, Cass. Thank you so much for sharing that. The journaling idea, I think, is really great. I think I watched a talk or something on YouTube or something around that thing, around the journaling side of it, and I can't actually recall where it was. If I remember, I'll put it on the chat for people to have a look at it later. But that was really, really powerful in itself, because again, it's we think of journaling as kind of Dear Diary or writing out this. But it can be so powerful, can't it?
Absolutely. The thing I think is that we're often, even though, well, I suppose it depends on how you interact with social media, but we're often still totally inside our own heads. So when it comes to learning or our self-belief, it's only what's inside here that we hear. So when I'm trying to help children learn different things, I often say, if you speak it out, even to yourself or to a device or to a family member, your ears are hearing it, and that's actually different to what your brain voice is like. So it's the same with the journaling. If it's just in your brain, it's either like a little worm that's being negative and knocking away at you, or it's an idea or a thought that you don't put into fruition because you've left it inside. So the journaling is definitely a positive way, and it can be so creative because, as we know, not always, but often if you have a neurodiversity, you have more creative talents, or you're more visual, or you're more auditory. So maybe it's not journaling, maybe it's doing a blog, or maybe it's recording songs. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you almost have to be given, like we were just saying, you have to do something about it. You almost have to be given permission to like think differently, because sadly our education system does funnel everything through. You have to write it down and you have to follow this path.
I remember a type of journey. I love to write blogs. I tend to write really, really fast, and then my partner, who's incredible, then goes through and proofreads it and almost rewrites the whole blog. But generally, I love actually writing things. I love creating posts. I love asking questions in this, and I didn't realize, journaling. I use journaling as a kind of something within when I was in the corporate sector, and I was kind of working my way up the ranks through in retail. My very first boss gave me told me to go out and get a book, and every day he said, write A, B, C, and D down on the bottom on the left hand side, and every day I want you to write A, what you've achieved for that day, as in personal achievement, the benefit of that achievement, your concern for C, and D, what you're going to be doing next. And at the time I was quite young, and I was thinking, my goodness, this isn't,
more writing. More
writing. I don't want any more writing. But it was so effective, because every day I went away, I just spent, 3 or 4 minutes a day, just writing down whatever I achieved. And at the time I was thinking, well, I'm not, why am I doing this? It's not really reflective. It could be anything. It could be, anything within business. So achievement, and then benefit, and concern, and do next. And the concern was, loads, because there were so many concerns I was trying to write down. And then the do next was giving me an action to then take responsibility of those concerns. But here's the funny thing, because I wrote book after book after book for years and years and years, just kept writing and writing and writing. But whenever I went for a promotion, and I didn't realize I had dyslexia at the time, I would take a couple of those books. So when they asked the question, can you tell me why you're right for this role? What have you achieved recently? What's the benefits of the company? How are you a problem solver? Those A, B, C's, and D's really, really helped.
That's so awesome. That was such great advice for back then, someone giving you that advice. I definitely say that's so awesome as a way to work forward with things. And what you were saying is so true, because it enabled you to do the next step. And I think that's, again, we can often, if we're neurodiverse, get stuck in our own heads, or we believe the labels we're told, like we're not clever enough, or we're not able enough, or that's something we can't do. And I think that being personally reflective, so what you were doing then, that ABCD, is brilliant, because it was very simple. You could obviously choose to write as much as you wanted, and unfortunately, again, another dyslexic type trait is that you end up on the more negative than the positive. But over time, hopefully, that's enabled you to change. But that's what I hope that students and people I work with see, that it's not really the belief that you've always told yourself. Actually, you are capable of doing some things. You might have to dig deeper to find it, because you really might be in a negative place. But actually, there's always things that you are good at, and there's always takeaways. And it's important to be a reflective learner. The thing that they talk about sort of in dyslexia and other fields is that metacognition, which is a posh word for saying learning how to learn. And I think we don't do that enough. Schools are getting more aware of it, and lots of schools are putting it into place. But that learning how you learn, what sort of learner are you? But that enables that reflectiveness. So that great idea that you talked about, kind of like journaling, those 4 key points, wouldn't expect a student to do that all the time. But how can we expect to improve just in life generally if we don't look back to be able to move forward? And we can put a full stop on the negative of the past, but we have to work out where we're going next. And I think we can often get stuck in that negativity, not necessarily from our own making, but because of the environment around us. So if you have those sort of strategies to work from, it really makes an empowering difference.
You mentioned about the different types of learning as well, and Philippa Fabry has put gaming is helpful for lots of lots of kids as well. Have you had an experience within that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not a great gaming fan. It's not something that I'm skilled in myself. So often my students will talk to me about it, and it's the way that I also sort of link in. I think building rapport with the students that I work with is so really important. It's the most important thing, because if they don't trust me and they can't see that there's a link, they're not going to work with me. So I will often ask, especially the boys. So again, not being too stereotypical, but the boys will often be more gamey than girls, and the way to get them to think about writing, the way to get them engaged in a learning process, is to talk about the games that they are playing, and that gives them an amazing way in to see. But also, as we just saw from that point, it is absolutely true that gaming can help your brain in some. There's so many like research products that are done in it. Obviously, if you're on it 24 hours a day and it's just a shoot 'em up one, not necessarily. But even in those games, there's strategy, there's teamwork. So when you're talking about sort of looking at the skills you need for employment and beyond and living a positive life, though the gaming skills can be transferred, it's just making sure that that learners know that that's the case. Because gaming is definitely important. And the thing I did when I less so now because I'm online, but everything I do when I'm working with my students online, I try and make short and punchy and move from activity to activity. When I worked with them in a one-to-one situation, I was very fortunate to have an iPad. And I found lots of different apps and games, and some I would call it a game, because then they really thought they weren't learning. And even if it was something that really totally was sold as a game, there was always that aspect about them being more observant, about tracking their speed, or that they had to gain things in order to be able to move up a level. And then I would talk to them about how that could be used in their learning. After they've had a break, but I would use that for a brain break. So if I worked for an hour, I would be using the iPad predominantly throughout. I'd have concrete activities to use too, so using letters, numbers, different things that they could manipulate and move around, because that helps the brain learn too. But because we are in a technological age, they obviously responded more and really didn't think they were learning when they were using it. However, I always explained what I was doing. But when they were doing a game, it was totally, I would turn away with an eye to the side, but I would let them just have that moment to kind of release that, okay, I've got a chance to have a break. So totally agree. Gaming is on many levels really important, because it's part of that technology, a part of that assistiveness that we really need in today's world, because it's not giving us an advantage, it's giving us a level playing field. So anytime it can be used.
I totally agree, and I'll just add. Philippa has said again, I love helping kids demystify their learning methods, and you're absolutely right, Philippa, and I'm sure you can agree on this, Cass. And what you've been explaining is that kind of different way of learning,
definitely
to entice the people to kind of the children to think, well, actually, yes, this is learning, even though this is not standard. That textbook that we would normally think of within learning. So
I would agree that word that Philippa just used, demystifying, is so important, because I think that's the point, is that we believe things have to be done a certain way. And again, it's that belief versus reality kind of thing. Your teachers might tell you one way, but actually, if you can find a different way and you still get the right answer, that's kind of okay too. But also, as you said, it's that understanding how you learn. So, with you possibly with your ADHD growing up in school, because it was undiagnosed, I don't know what you did, but you may have either, because this is generally what I find with my students, you may have either tried to hide it, and then when you got home, you just kind of like exploded at home, or teachers were like, can you not sit still, or can you not stay focused, and they were kind of constantly on you. So there's more than that, but it kind of fits in those two categories.
Absolutely, and there's got to be an outlet somewhere, within that. So I completely, we can't just contain, the ADHD or the dyslexia. There has to be some sort of outlet. So someone
definitely
needs, for your own kind of mental health and your own sort of sanity, really, you need to kind of be able to
definitely.
I want to touch on the fact that if anyone's listening on the podcast, Cass has got an amazing picture of a lighthouse behind her. And can you just, I know you briefly mentioned it when we did the introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about the lighthouse, and then some of you've created some groups around it as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so because I've always wanted to do it, because I feel like I'm so blessed with where my sort of life has taken me working with individuals, but I still, like yourself, want to make a bigger impact, not about me, but about sharing this understanding of what it's like to be neurodiverse. And having the pandemic kind of made that have to be a reality, because I was traveling to students' homes, going into schools on a daily basis. Then I couldn't do that. So the first thing I did was just try to take my business online, which I was able to do. Some of my students couldn't cope with more online lessons, and depending on their neurodiversity, if they were autistic or with ADHD, things like that, it was just too much to ask of them. But I did manage to retain most of them. It's been a bit hard, going back to your previous statement, because some of my students who find it really hard to focus, when I was with them, I'd let them get up and move around, kind of wiggle on their chair, because teachers don't normally allow that. I would, with the awareness that they had to stay focused.
Brilliant.
When they're at home and we've got like what we've got going on today, and they suddenly get up out of the table, I can't hear them answer the question. Or if they go over to the fridge to have a drink, I can't hear them when they're talking to the fridge. But you know, we work on it. So that's where my business kind of went. And then I'm also really an advocate for always learning how to learn in whatever field you're in, and we never stop learning. So I was like, so how can I develop my business more online? So I've gone on to a number of social media platforms that I kind of was on before, but I did some training myself to kind of understand how I could be more present. And one of the main things was creating a group, which I called Lighthouse on Dyslexia, because I wanted to reach kind of the target audience is more to do with people who support students with a learning need. So it could be a parent, but it could equally be a teacher. And I sort of go on there daily and try to put tips and hints, share stories, but I also do some lives as well, where I talk about either something that's come up for me that day, or I've got like a program of ideas. So this week's concept is homework. I've done memory aids before, so we kind of and assistive technology. Journaling is something I picked up on the other week as well. So I kind of share all of those things. But the idea of the lighthouse was because I think the lighthouse is it's important for safety. Like, the reason that it's there is because it's showing us that there's something unseen that is in a lighthouse case a danger. In dyslexia and all the others, it's not a danger. It's just that there's something unseen that we want to illuminate. We want to put light on. And so that's what I liked about the lighthouse, that they're steadfastly there, always shining a light. And it's that light that we want others to possess. That's why you're doing the Neurodiversity Stories, because we're sharing our own stories, but how we've either overcome difficulties or where our life has taken us because we are neurodiverse. And I know that in the selling terms, we often talk about like a pain point, like people are coming from somewhere that's a challenge. And I want to start adapting that, because actually having a neurodiversity, having a label, that's not a pain point. It's other people understanding it that's the difficulty. And therefore, if we understand it ourselves, which is what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, if we can understand it ourselves and then flip the negative into a more positive way of being. So I know we have to deal with the anxieties, the concerns, the stress that school's not understanding, or the child doesn't want to do homework, those kind of things, they are definitely there, and they are things that have to be acknowledged. But if we stay in the negative, then when we get to our adult life, we're not going to achieve actually what was our intended purpose for being here. So that's kind of where I've gone with the Lighthouse on Dyslexia, because I think it's really important. I'm not always positive about it. I am when I'm talking to other people. Sometimes I'm like, oh, why can't I spell things? It would just be so easy. Or why can't I remember? So I can't say that I'm 100% happy about everything all the time. But I think it's really important that we start to flip that negative and build that understanding.
I think you're absolutely right, and thank you for sharing that, Cass. And if it's okay, we'll put all the links into the comments. When we put this out on the podcast and YouTube as well, we'll put all the links. So it's an incredible group. So much fantastic content out there.
Thank you.
That people can connect and learn on that as well. So we'll put that out there as well. I want to kind of touch on one of the topics as well. I think we mentioned it at the start, around kind of, I think there was in the government said at the time, it was around kind of, we're now pushing to work from home But they've said forever. I mean, forever.
Yeah.
How long should you say forever? I mean, it's a very long time.
Yes, absolutely.
What's your kind of your thought on that? Because I get it. I work for myself now, so I go into companies, or we travel to different countries, prior to the pandemic. And then we work for a certain amount of time, but I know my working habits and how best I can kind of get the best out of me. But in a working environment, I think now if I was in an office for, say, 10 hours a day or however long it is, that I would struggle. But sometimes I guess I would also miss some of the camaraderie between the teams as well. What do you think on that, Cass? You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No, I think you're right. One of my favorite words that I always use in life is that we need balance, don't we? So I think I've quite enjoyed doing the online lessons that I've done. But the difficulty is not being next to someone, because I can't interact in the same way. So I initially thought, how was I going to do this? Because how could I help the way I can't reach through a computer? I can't have the resources right there. I can show it on the screen. And I think for some of my students, it's been both ways. Some of them have preferred the home learning, where they've been able to stay focused and learn specifically, but at their own pace. It's actually really helped them. Some of the ones that have just gone through GCSEs, where they don't have to actually sit the exam would have meant that they wouldn't have failed, but they wouldn't have done their best option. Whereas being able to interact with the teachers and do that kind of stuff has really had a positive impact for them. I think it's about balance. It's about, for me, I miss working with the students face to face. I don't have a team that I work with, but I used to go into school, so I kind of miss that. But I think it's about finding balance, and I think for all of us, when it's safe to do so and all of that kind of thing, it's working out. I think that the pandemic has given us the option to shine a light on, is there other ways of doing this? The same with education. It would be nice if they took some lessons from this past experience of how adaptable. I mean, teachers have been amazing. They've had to adapt. They've had to go on screen. Some of them weren't technologically able and they weren't able to do things, and now they are. But equally, were they thinking about their students that found learning challenging? Because some schools were making kids sit at the computer all day in their school uniform. Most weren't. But my students who needed to get up and move around were told that they couldn't mute themselves or unmute them. So all these different things. So it's trying to find a balance. So I think for adults and students, if we could take this opportunity and use it once the world returns to some sort of normality where we're not conscious of spreading a virus, I think it would be really nice to take the time to look back at seeing how we could adapt everything. So like you said, for office workers, those who have neurodiversities, actually working from home might mean that they're more productive, but it means that their social skills that they needed to have support with, they're losing those again. So again, it's just that balance. That's what I would sort of leave with.
Thank that, and that's absolutely spot on, Cass. And I guess just around kind of say office environments, we've seen over the years that companies have now created well-being spaces, and there's been places where they can kind of rest and meditate, and all these different things that companies now thought actually will put in place. And I guess we tend to think, okay, so if we can work from home, we tend to think that everyone at home has got the level, it's a level playing field of, working environments as everyone else.
Yes.
So, but as we know, it's not. As we know, in some schools with some students, some have laptops, some have an office they can work in. Some are actually borrowing, the family computer. So it's so mixed, isn't it?
And that's the difficulty. If you've had a home where there's only one device and you can only use the broadband now and again, or there isn't broadband, then your academic progress has been affected by the last year. If you've got lots of devices and you've got space where you can work and all of that kind of thing, and then everybody in the family is doing their online stuff because everybody's job has gone online as well as the kids, but you've got the access to it, that's perfect. But there is, again, that need for a balance. It needs to be equal for everybody in some respect, and be more aware of what people need and what's available to them.
Absolutely. Cass, we're coming up to the end of the time. As I say with all of my guests, and I'm not lying, I've still got a load of questions, and I could talk to you for absolute hours. It's been incredibly fascinating. How can people, if they wanted to connect with you, Cass, we'll put your details in there as well, but how can people connect with you?
Connect as well. So I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and so you can search by my name, or you can go to Lighthouse on Dyslexia, and I'm on both of those ones. So yeah, if you put the other information up, that's perfect. But I would love to hear from anyone else with their amazing stories, because it's so important to share. Because I often talk about sharing celebrity stories who are dyslexic, but actually there are many non-celebrities like yourself who have amazing journey and have used what they've learned about their learning need. And I think if there are other people on here like you've had before, it's sharing those. It's not about a celebrity. It's about where we've done in our normal life using our diversity to further our lives. I think is really important. So I'd love to hear from more people and share their stories too. But thank you so much for what you're doing, because it's making such a big difference in our field. And I appreciate you giving me the time to speak today. So thank you.
Bless you, Cass. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the stories, and I will be an avid follower within your group. So if I can help in any way, then please do let me know. Have an amazing rest of the Friday and a lovely weekend. And I will
you
catch
too.
You very soon, Cass. Take care. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again. Bye.
So, guys, that was Cass, Cassandra. As you can tell from the talk, there's so much more that we could have spoken about. She's doing incredible things. Please do connect with her. Please do connect with her on her social groups as well. There's so much information out there for people that have dyslexia, or again, if you feel a work colleague or your child or someone you know has there's so much information out there that can really help. So guys, that wraps up another Neurodiversity Stories. A massive thank you to our new sponsors. A massive thank you to everyone that continues to tune in and watches this on the replay. If you'd like to share your neurodiversity story, then please do get in touch, and we will see you very, very soon. Have an amazing Friday and a brilliant weekend. Take care, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.